Welcome back to Pod Save the World. I'm Tommy Vitor.
I'm Ben Rhodes.
How's the jet lag?
It's pretty bad, actually.
Europe is like plus 8, plus 9.
Look, this is another one of those things where you feel age a little bit, but we were gone for 2 weeks, right? So the first night I woke up at 3 a.m. and was just up. Mm-hmm. And now I'm on day 3 and I've gotten it up to 5.
Oh, that's
which
pretty
is
good.
Basically,
that's sleeping
I'm
in.
usually pretty early, so I'm almost there.
Yeah, I'm with you. The baby had us up at 3 last night, but we fell back asleep eventually.
Yes, baby's a good plan to be able to manage jet lag.
Just manage anything.
Yeah.
But listen,
it's a permanent jet lag.
As long as the Chateau Neuf de Pape is still coursing through your veins.
Yeah, it really is. My wine intake, let's just say, went up dramatically.
As it should.
Yeah, my oldest daughter said to me finally towards the end, because towards the end I was drinking more wine too, because I was about to lose access to it.
Yeah, right.
And she's like, "Daddy, if you keep drinking wine, you're gonna get drunk." And I was like, "What?
Daddy, why are your teeth purple?" Don't worry about it.
I was like, "Don't worry."
Oh man, I can't wait to get scolded by my kids.
Yeah, I know. It's like it's what happens when they get to be about 8.
Very smart questions and insights. Listen, I'm very glad you're back because we got a lot to talk about today. While you were gone, Ben, you might have noticed there was a huge leak of highly classified national security documents.
Yes,
it's causing problems across the globe.
One of those days you're glad you're not working there.
So glad. The Biden administration released an after-action report on the Afghanistan withdrawal, which was interesting. So we're going to tell you guys what it says, because I know you're not reading 12 pages out there, folks. It's okay. We did it for you. Lots of people are pissed at French President Emmanuel Macron's trip to China. President Biden is very excited about his trip to Ireland and Northern Ireland. There's some scary tensions in Israel. We got some sports washing by the Saudis, and Twitter will not stop doing stupid stuff, and we have to talk about it. And then, Ben, you did our interview today. What are listeners going to hear?
Yeah, so I talked to Valerie Hopkins, who's an international reporter for the New York Times, and has been based or reporting from Russia and Ukraine, but including Russia. Is friends with Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter who was detained. So we talk about what it's like to be a reporter in Russia since the war started. We talk a lot about Evan and what kind of guy he was, how it feels to see him in the state he's in, the questions that news organizations and journalists now have to face about how to report on Russia, whether to have people there. Mm-hmm. And then we also talk a little bit about Russian opinion. Like, she had been focused on that. She'd been out when she was in Russia talking to Russians, giving a more nuanced picture of the variety of opinions about the war in Russia, which we don't hear much about. So great interview, and really important story that we're going to have to follow, which is, her point basically is this arrest, is tragic above all for Evan and his family, but it's also just, if we lose access to what's already a fairly incomplete picture of what's going on in Russia, that would be a huge loss to the world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, listen, I have enormous respect for any reporter still doing reporting out of Russia that's at a Western news outlet, but I personally would get the hell out of there.
Yeah, I mean, it just and part of what's so extraordinary is that, like, during the Cold War, like, there were reporters in the Soviet Union, and it's more dangerous now than it was like in the Cold War.
Last time this happened was 1986.
Yeah,
it's like a U.S. news reporter was accused of being a spy,
and he was, he was released in a couple weeks.
Yeah, like 11 days.
Yeah.
Terrible. Well, I'm very excited to listen to that, and grateful to her for joining the show. So our first topic today, Ben, is this massive leak of classified information, and some news reports are already saying this could be worse than the Snowden disclosures. Seems a little premature and hyperbolic to me. It's like two playbooks, but I guess time will tell. The bigger question is, Ben, do you think this is the intelligence community's Katrina?
We haven't dusted that one off.
It felt good.
Yeah.
It felt good. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the origin of the documents, or at least what we know about the origin of the documents, so we can dig into what they say. So the New York Times first reported on the existence of this leak last week after 5 documents appeared on a Russian Telegram channel. That's a social media channel, very popular in Russia. News reports say there's about 100 documents total. The U.S. can't confirm that, though. The majority of the documents appear to be dated from February and March, and were first posted online on Discord, which is a social media platform with chat rooms and stuff. It was popularized by gamers. Specifically, they were posted on a Discord channel focused on Minecraft. Is that a game that's popular in your house?
No, we've kept it. It's not in the house yet.
Okay.
Yeah, my kids are aware of it, and they're Minecraft curious, but it's not anything against Minecraft. It's just more like waiting for them to.
Yeah, it's just like a super popular kind of like mini metaverse.
Oh, I played it a little bit. It's just kind of, but I'm not much of a gamer. So.
Okay. Well, if you'd been on the right Discord, you could have got these docs. Apparently, they also popped up on a site Discord channel for fans of a Filipino YouTuber. From there, they hopped to 4chan, Telegram, everywhere else. So the documents themselves appear to be briefing materials prepared for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They primarily focus on the war in Ukraine, but touch on a number of additional topics and draw on reporting from across the intelligence community, including the CIA. The documents looked like they were printed and photographed and then uploaded that way. It wasn't some like leak on a thumb drive or something, because in the photos you can see like a box for somebody's hunting rifle, Gorilla Glue, like some weird things. So Ben, the best case scenario here seems to be that someone got access to, photographed, and uploaded a single day's intel briefing book that had prepared for General Milley and the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
Someone lost a briefing book.
Yeah, the job of General Milley and his team, they provide the president military advice. It would make sense that the contents would focus on Ukraine and Russia, but also include other topics, because you imagine Milley being like, hey, what's going on in Israel? Can I get a briefing on that, protest thing? The problem with the best case scenario is it's still very bad, because Milley gets like really good, high sensitive intelligence. The worst case scenario could be that someone had or has ongoing access to these joint staff briefing books. There may be a bunch more information online, or the joint staff got hacked by a foreign actor. Bellingcat, which is an investigative journalism group that specializes in open source intelligence collection, talked to sources who claim that many more documents were leaked over the past few weeks in another Discord channel called Thug Shaker Central, which is one I know you also frequent. But Bellingcat could not confirm this because the Thug Shaker channel was deleted. So this is why, like, John Kirby, our friend and former colleague, who's now the NSC spokesman, has been saying bluntly, like, we don't know. We don't know if this leak has been plugged. We don't know exactly what's out there. Like, this is, by the way, why John is kind of rare in spokesman circles. He's just, like, candid about what we don't know. So what I do know, Ben, is they are taking this very seriously. General Austin referred the matter to the Department of Justice for a criminal investigation. The Pentagon has locked down and limited access to intelligence. They're trying to figure out how the leak happened. Again, sorry for the long wind up there. First question for you, Ben. How much PTSD did reading about this give you over the weekend?
Oh, my God. I mean, the Snowden, it gave me massive Snowden. We had the WikiLeaks disclosures of like every cable in the U.S. State Department, it seemed like. Then we had the Snowden disclosures in 2013. And
it was like a fine Chateauneuf to pop, It's like starts with the WikiLeaks and then notes of lingering.
And then 2016, the 2016 election stuff. So,
oh, God, yeah.
Yeah, actually, before we get into the individual documents, like the reason that is really important to reflect back on is the problem. This thus far appears to be a very different kind of issue in the sense that what Snowden had and was leaking were kind of the wiring, the plumbing, if you will, like how we collect intelligence, which has its own pretty big risks, because once that's out in the world, it becomes harder, whether you agree with Snowden or not about mass surveillance. Foreign governments could obviously reverse engineer. Okay, if this is how they do that, we'll patch this and try to keep them out. And so that was like a structural leak of, like the diagram of the house,
Exactly.
What this appears to be is, like, I don't want to say the crown jewels, but like the really good stuff. That is the end product.
PDB adjacent.
Yes, that is the end product of the intelligence community. So instead of the diagram of the house, this is like the really expensive stuff inside that you can break in and take. And because this is, this is like to the joint, you mentioned General Milley, like, the Joint Chiefs of Staff this isn't necessarily General Milley's personal briefing. It could be, but I think what people have to understand is like a lot of people get access to, like the PDB, for instance. Like I got the PDB. So did, like, I think at the end of the day, like probably dozens of people, even though that's the president's brief, right? So the people that work at the Joint Staff also have access to this. So
there's a ton of them too.
Yeah, and that's a pretty big operation that they run over there. But the problem with it is that at any given day, what's in that briefing is the best stuff, right? It's curated by the intelligence community. Here's what we think you need to know now about the most important things happening in the world. And so the problem is this stuff appears to be really good stuff, and that can be reverse engineered to like, how did you acquire this data, or what does the U.S. know about that we can patch? But it also just puts out a lot of the U.S. government's thinking on things in ways that are going to have long-lasting repercussions with some relationships with other countries we can get into.
Yeah, and I'm sure the information that goes to Milley or the information that ends up in the PDB is a lot less reluctant to say how we got the information, right? Like this was signals intelligence collected on a senior Mossad agent, for example. Yeah. Whereas a product that was going a little wider to a bigger distribution list, it might just say reliable intelligence on Mossad thinking suggests blah, 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 right? To sort of like fuzz it up. If it was
or some parentheses with a bunch of letters that, like, but I think that the what they could do, for instance, though, is that they could say you're Russia, right? They could read the documents and kind of figure out what the U.S. has penetrated on their side, and then they could try to go purge people or patch that or set up new structures to avoid routing information that way. Now, what we should also say is like, there's so much penetration and there's so much disinformation that this stuff may be less valuable than it might have been 5 or 10 years ago.
Absolutely. So I want to get into the Russia stuff in particular, because that does seem like the most sensitive piece. But before we do that, there's been lots of interesting forensics happening to try to figure out the source of the leak. So I saw Reuters noted that the documents only went to American consumers. They were marked no foreign, which suggests that it would have couldn't have been like, someone in the Five Eyes, like a liaison partner, the British service or something. But Alex Ward at Politico noticed that the documents were printed on something called A4 paper, which apparently is like the standard paper used abroad, but not in the United States. We got lots of like open source intrigue. At least one document was edited in a way to make it look better for the Russian government. The correct version, the real version, seems to have been posted in one place, but someone changed it to understate Russian casualties when they posted on Telegram. That was interesting, but it was sort of shittily done, so people don't think it was a state actor.
So we should say this is because this is a really interesting question, because I've been, like if you're seeing these documents being reported on, and it's possible that there's some forgeries too, like that people now know that people think that there's leaked documents, so let's make some new ones and put them out, or it could be that there's a document that, like you said, like the Russian one that turns the dial in one direction or another, and that's part of the communications challenge for the U.S. government is you don't want to get in the position of confirming documents,
right?
But at the same time, you might want to shoot down something. If you see something that's a fabrication, your instinct is going to be to shoot that down. But if you start denying that certain documents are true but not others, you're kind of confirming that. So this is the challenge that the White House has.
The worst.
And I think that the best thing to do is kind of what John Kirby's doing, right? Tell people what you don't know. You don't get in the practice of adjudicating every individual document, but you have to figure out some ways, probably at some point, to point out stuff that is total forgery, and that's difficult.
Yeah, Trump will say these all came from Hunter's laptop. Two other quick things. So the Guardian reported.
Do we know they didn't?
We do not know that they didn't. The Guardian reported that the documents that were leaked in Discord initially seemed to be part of an argument between two users, and one of them used them to win an argument about the war in Ukraine, according to these open source analysts. And this leak isn't the first time that sensitive documents have shown up in a gaming-related server. The Wall Street Journal was reporting on this. Last year, a player in the War Thunder military vehicle combat game posted real classified information about British tanks, and then another time, a user posted classified information about a French tank because they wanted to push the game to be more accurate about the tank's real capabilities. So,
I mean, it would be pretty amazing if there is just like a hack because these gamers, want to like enhance their gaming experience.
Yeah, they're like, the Leclerc tank is not going fast enough.
I think that what's partly telling is it does seem like these documents were out there for a while without the U.S. government knowing it, right?
Maybe months, yeah.
And the reason that's interesting is because there's such a world of intelligence disinformation campaigns, and everybody's inventing fake documents or AI produced the kind of shit you send me, like deep fake voices and stuff like that. That actually it might be hard to be like, oh wait, shit, actually that is our stuff. That it does speak to how that scenario would have been impossible a decade ago. We're in just a totally new world.
British, top of the line British and French tank specs on some gaming server because the people want it to be more realistic. So you mentioned the intel on Russian military movements and Ukrainian military movements.
Yeah.
That, in my opinion, seems to be the most worrisome. So There was reportedly detail in these documents about intercepted communications within the FSB, the Russian intelligence service. There's details of how the Russian Defense Ministry is deliberating on things. There's granular Russian planning about how to counter Western tanks. There's detail about U.S. collection on Russian military targeting, which apparently we passed off to the Ukrainians to protect them. There's also information about anti-Western Russian propaganda operations in Africa, what the Wagner mercenary group is up to all over the world. Some of this intel, again, talks about intercepted communications. There's also lots of collection on the Ukrainian government and military. There are details about their S-300 air defense systems running low on munitions and what date they might run out. That's not great. There's debates within the Ukrainian government about military operations and tactics in Bakhmut, that town in the Donbass that's been hard fought over the last few months. So, Ben, again, like if this is, the best case scenario where this is one day's briefing book that somehow got out, I guess the good news is that the intelligence itself is a little older. It's a little less actionable. The bad news, as you said earlier, is the Russians should be able to adapt to prevent, this stuff from getting intercepted in the future. But I'm also kind of confused because clearly the U.S. has been all over their communications and movements for a while. The Biden administration has aggressively declassified stuff to release it. So it's just hard for me to kind of get my mind around like a damage assessment. The Ukrainian stuff seems very embarrassing, and I guess everyone just sucks it up.
But it's just like, look, sometimes these things are not as bad as they seem, and so here I'll devil's advocate it being because, because I was asked like a couple times about like, the actual assessment of the Ukrainian military is it's more degraded and. People know that.
Everyone
the Russians know that. They're fighting the Ukrainian military.
Right.
So sometimes do you want that broadcast? No, but we've been talking on this podcast for weeks about how Zelensky's been basically just pounding the table demanding weapons because they're running out of ammo. Mm-hmm. Like people know that, right? That's one aspect of this. I think on the Russian side, I was struck by how broad the coverage is, but then to speculate here, and I'm just speculating and looking at this stuff, you have to think that as Russia's being driven down this path of madness of invading Ukraine, that there are people in that system that are playing ball with the U.S. because they don't like what they're seeing. I don't know that to be true, but like it's so broad, and I just have to think that there's some people there like, who probably are like. First of all, when you're fighting a war, your comms are much more vulnerable.
Exactly.
Right? Like, you've got to communicate up and down a chain of command, so it's easier to intercept stuff. And also, you have people that are against the war and more likely to pass information. So I don't know that you can patch all that. Is my point.
No, that's a really good point because we've been reading all these stories about. Russian troops who didn't know they're going to Ukraine in the first place, winding up in like the Donbass and just using their personal cell phones and getting targeted. Like you have to think that kind of like desperation extends up the food chain at least somewhat and can be easily picked off.
Yeah. So sometimes like yes, it's not good. You don't want this stuff out there, but where this stuff has a longer tail is usually if like some of this stuff, like embarrassing stuff about Israel or Turkey or Egypt or other U.S. partners that's why the WikiLeaks stuff was so damaging. The diplomatic cables, it wasn't like sensitive collection, but it was like really embarrassing, and usually correct judgments about the governments that these people were dealing with.
In WikiLeaks, we pissed off every country.
Yeah, every country.
This one, it seems to be select. So the other sort of topics included deliberations in South Korea about whether to give the U.S. munitions to help replenish our stockpiles, given South Korea's concerns that they could wind up in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. This one is extremely awkward since Biden is hosting the president of South Korea for a state dinner on April 26th. President Yoon will also address a joint session of Congress during that visit because we're commemorating the 70th anniversary of the alliance between the U.S. and Korea. So tough timing there. Yeah. There was intelligence.
Kind of got ahead of the deliverable announcement.
The intelligence said the Mossad, Israel's version of the CIA, advocated for its staff and Israeli citizens to protest the new judicial reforms. Yeah. This one got an angry denial and denunciation from Bibi Netanyahu and his government. Annoyingly, it folds into Bibi's idiot son's conspiracy theories.
Deep state.
That the protests are the deep state, the protests are the State Department. It did seem like when I read that one, it could have been a garble. The intel report was sort of based off like what former public Mossad leaders had said.
Yeah. I mean, it could have basically be that like U.S. analysts are judging that like Mossad people don't like what Bibi's doing,
Right.
and there's a bunch of former people.
Yeah.
It could have the dial could have been turned up a bit. On this. I did put it this way: it didn't suggest. In looking at it, didn't seem like the Mossad was like running like a covert op to have protests, which is how the sensational version of it came out.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then there was a report alleging that Egypt secretly planned to covertly ship 40,000 rockets to Russia. That report was allegedly based off of intercepted communications between President Sisi and his military officials.
Yeah, that one seemed pretty alarming. It's
a big deal.
That seemed like a big fucking deal.
That's a real problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge fucking problem. This is the second largest recipient of U.S. military assistance in the world after Israel. Already, we shouldn't be providing it. You and I are both opposed to it on human rights grounds. But if these guys are shipping rockets to Russia to fight a war that we say is the number one foreign policy priority of the United States, can we finally cut these guys off?
Yeah,
from Egypt?
yeah. Here's another one you'll like, Ben. There was an AP report I just saw about an intelligence report saying Russia had convinced the UAE to get their intel services to work against the U.S. and the U.K.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, and I do think there's something to this Egypt and UAE one, which is, and again, if these are accurate documents, but let's just say they have the ring of truth, look, we've been looking at this question of the Saudis, the Emiratis, and we should have added the Egyptians to that. They usually try to avoid scrutiny like this, but this, when you are framing the war in Ukraine correctly, in my judgment, so I agree with the Biden administration on their framing as a battle between democracy and autocracy. Well, these are autocracies in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, and what these documents seem to suggest is just what we've been talking about in this podcast for a while. Like, it seems like they're more in the autocratic camp, put it this way, than they are in our camp.
Yeah. So I guess, I don't think anyone would argue that U.S. intelligence collection on Russian military movements and deliberations is anything but makes total sense.
Yeah.
A good use of time and money, right?
Yeah,
there is this separate set of collection on friends and frenemies, the South Koreans, the Israelis, the Egyptians, the UAE. I guess what I'm starting to wonder is, do you think this is still legitimate collection? Are we getting enough insight from these intelligence products that it's worth the inevitable fallout when something like this leaks? Because it's happening over and over and over again. It seems like we're at a place where we're just incapable of protecting U.S. secrets.
That's a really good point, because, I felt like this by the end of the Obama administration, which is that, because ultimately what was a pain in the ass too in the White House is somehow you're accountable for something that what the hell were we supposed to do to prevent leaks of stuff? But each leak is corrected as if it's going to be the last one. And yet this is just, happened on repeat. And to your point, no, I'm not sure it is worth it. I mean, look, we should be able to make judgments about the South Koreans. Look, absolutely, we should be able to have analysis of South Korean decision-making intentions, but
that's the State Department, right?
Yeah, you can't ask the U.S. government to not be trying to figure out what an ally is going to decide to do, right? Because that's part of the job of government. But I would argue that oftentimes, a good diplomacy and having broad contacts in the South Korean government and South Korean society that are not secret, but are just the business of interacting with a partner, can usually tell you what you need to know.
Yeah, really good ambassador.
Yeah. Now,
knows a lot of people.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of meetings.
Well, there you go. And diplomats who get out, in a place like South Korea, they can get out. Now, the flip side of that is there are these places like South Korea that are I think viewed a little differently than others, because a war could break out,
that's true,
between North Korea and South Korea.
That's very true.
And
you need that.
Then all of a sudden you want to know everything, right?
Yeah, we got 27,500 U.S. troops sitting there.
Yeah, so I think it's hard to ask the U.S. government to not kind of turn and I'm not revealing anything, but
that's a really good point.
It's just a little different, but in general, default, I think you want a relationship of trust with a country like South Korea, and you should be able to learn the most important stuff you need to know by going in through the front door.
Yeah. So what seems like going to happen, DOJ will prosecute the shit out of this, or at least investigate it. Sounds like the Department of Defense is locking down distribution of intelligence. I'm sure they might make long-term decisions to really, really limit sort of the most sophisticated or sensitive intelligence products that go out. But, you and I were sitting in the White House, right?
I don't think you can patch it, yeah.
I doubt you ever received a briefing that was like, hey, by the way, we're spying on Angela Merkel's cell phone. Or who knows if Obama ever did.
I never did. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's like, I'm sure if you told Obama, hey, do you want to spy on Angela Merkel's personal cell phone or no? He said, absolutely not. But there's this sort of, there is a deep state that kind of exists. It's not like evil and nefarious. It's this monolithic thing.
No, we've talked about this, like, but at the end of the day, like, again, even the precisely because it is like the presidential daily briefing, it's not raw intelligence. Like, this is a hard thing for people to understand. This is not like, here's a 50-page transcript that we intercepted. It's like a summary of what we think is happening somewhere.
Right.
That you sometimes don't have any idea where that you can ask, well, where'd we learn this, you know? And so the capacity to kind of limit distribution, I don't think that fixes it. I mean, the smartest thing they did is when they shifted from paper to tablets, right? Because there you can do things like, you know, if that tablet leaves a room, it's wiped, you know, like nothing's on it, you know? Whereas if you leave a binder of documents, like in Starbucks, you know?
The Minecraft guys have it.
Yeah, or if the Minecraft guy figures out what you're reading over there and starts taking pictures of, you know, like, so like, I think the physical dissemination of paper, that makes a lot of sense. But in terms of like restricting who knows something, I mean, anybody who works in General Milley's office or anybody's on the joint chat, you know, any of the Joint Chiefs or any, you know, like
somebody was supposed to take a burn bag out and actually burn it, but decided not to, right? Like, these intelligence products go to human beings, right? They're the end user. Some of them are corrupt. Some of them are irresponsible. Like, it's people, you can accidentally lose a document. It happens.
But there are, and this is where the deep state exists. Like, don't at me. I don't know if like Ben Wittes or something, but like I didn't learn like even as a high level consumer intelligence like much about like our nuclear weapons. You know, like they don't just you don't like get the job and they come tell you exactly. That's the point. Is there is a lot of stuff that's very sensitive in the U.S. government that just doesn't travel about.
Yeah, it's not one of those restaurants where they push around a cart with a dessert tray. You're like, oh, exactly. I love that. You know? They read you into things if you have a need to know.
If you need to know it. And the thing about this file, if it was a file, is that this was the stuff that was most present. And again, how can these people do their jobs if they don't know the state of play in Bakhmut? You know, like how if someone's in charge of arming the Ukrainian military, it's not just like, it's not General Milley can just do that without reading in other people. Like a lot of people in the U.S. government need to know that Ukraine is running low on X, Y, and Z because it's their job to fucking get them X, Y, and Z. So I don't think there's some answer. This is why you're right about like these leaks will keep happening where you can restrict this to like 5 people reading about the state of play in Bakhmut. Like thousands of people in the U.S. government need to know what the state of play is in Bakhmut.
Yeah. Here's my conclusion. If you see anyone on the comm staff at the NSC, if you see John Kirby, if you see the Defense Department, press people, maybe the State Department, buy him a drink.
Yeah.
Because they didn't make this mess, but they're cleaning it up. So are diplomats.
Avril Haines, like the Director of National Intelligence. I pour one out for Avril.
Pour one out. Yeah. Jesus Christ. Okay, Ben. Well, I guess we're just going to stick with challenges with intelligence here. Let's turn to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because the administration, the Biden team, released a very interesting 12-page report on the causes and lessons learned from the Afghanistan withdrawal. Just a couple things that jumped out at me. So it had a lot of detail about how much the Trump administration policies completely screwed them and set them down a tough path in terms of the eventual outcome. We knew a lot of this, but seeing it together was compelling. So, for example, Trump drew down to 2,500 troops right before he left office, like January 2021. There was zero plan given by his team to the Biden team for how to get the rest of the people out, despite the fact that they kind of like handed them this bag. The report says, quote, when Biden took office, quote, the Taliban were in the strongest military position that they had been in since 2001, controlling or contesting nearly half the country. Again, I think we knew that, but it's compelling to hear it in the sort of like simple terms.
Yeah.
They assessed that if Biden broke the withdrawal timeline, U.S. troops would have been attacked and that the U.S. would have needed to send more troops back to Afghanistan to fight back. Again, we knew that. Trump allowed a backlog of over 18,000 SIV visa applicants. Those are the special visas for Afghans who helped the U.S. out in some way. It did talk about sort of lessons learned from Afghanistan, contingency planning, and communications in evacuations, like what happened in Afghanistan and how they applied those in Ukraine and Ethiopia. The conclusion to the document was basically this. Ultimately, after more than 20 years, more than $2 trillion, and standing up an Afghan army of 300,000 soldiers, the speed and ease with which the Taliban took control of Afghanistan suggests that there was no scenario except a permanent and significantly expanded U.S. military presence that would have changed the trajectory. It's hard to argue with that kind of like big picture take.
Yeah, no, look, I clearly they're trying to get ahead of all these congressional investigations that are gathering steam, and correctly, they want to kind of focus people on a couple of big points. One, that Trump made this deal and kind of set this whole thing in motion. And two, that last point that like absent, there wasn't like this middle option of like, if we just kept Bagram, everything would have been fine.
Muddle through.
That basically absent the U.S. kind of recommitting to Afghanistan and probably increasing resources, the trajectory was kind of where it was going to go. So if you're going to withdraw, you might as well withdraw. Yeah. Now there was, and that's right, and it's important for them to be framing everything that's going to be coming out. There's an Afghanistan commission that's looking at the whole history of the war, which is, I think, a very useful exercise.
Definitely, and
probably a lot of sensationalist Republican gotcha oversight. There was stuff on like the evacuation that was, they just don't want to concede that it could have been done better.
This is what bothered me too.
It bothers me because they've already lost that argument. So I don't know who they think they're going to convince that the evacuation itself went well. They basically made recommendations like, well, next time this happens, we should begin it sooner. But like, that's kind of a weird recommendation because like, I hope there's not a next time that like a 20-year war ends like that. So they still seem to be kind of trying to avoid just saying, hey, we probably should have begun evacuating more people sooner. Like, instead it was kind of forward looking, like next time, maybe we should evacuate people sooner. And so that's where I think they're still too defensive about what was a shitty situation. But one where, basically everybody's judgment from veterans who are getting people out to civil society was, you should have started this clock earlier. We were telling you to do that. And that leads to a comment I have about the oversight, but I don't know if you...
No, I had the same thought you did, which was I have no doubt, like they talk about all this planning that went into the eventual evacuation and all this, preparation that ultimately allowed them to get what is like 124,000 people out of the country. But it doesn't address the fact that it wasn't necessarily the right people that we got out, right? Yeah. Like we promised to help all these people and a lot of them were left behind. And, for example, also in the report, Ben,
and where are those 124,000 people?
Right. And we're not talking Americans. We're talking about like people who helped the U.S. military. Yeah. And they talked about how the U.S. went from issuing 100 SIV, those are the special visas, a week in March to more than 1,000 a week in July. No doubt Joe Biden deserves enormous credit for ramping that process back up. But like you do the math and you realize
that's nothing.
It wasn't
it's
like
a drop in the ocean.
You should have. That's an argument to delay the withdrawal timeline, I think.
Yes, exactly. The point is that they needed a different structural approach to evacuating people from the moment that he announced that we were leaving. And again, I get all the reasons why.
Right, and in fairness, they're like, look, we didn't want to like
spook people,
precipitate a collapse.
So, but like that's the critique. Yeah. So look, and they may want to continue to contest that, and that's entirely their right. I don't know that who they're convincing of that, and so better sometimes to kind of figure out where you're going to acknowledge. Now, this plays into the oversight question, because the other thing I saw that we didn't talk about, but like Tony Blinken was testifying, and there's a dissent cable, right? So the State Department has a process by which people can dissent from decisions, and the Republicans have their eyes on Embassy Kabul. Did they file a dissent cable to basically what was to warn that this place is going to collapse and don't do this.
I'm sure they did.
Well, they did, and so they want that document. And Tony's saying, well, actually, the integrity of the dissent channel is that people can air their views. He's totally correct. Tony's absolutely right in saying we set up this channel so that people could provide advice without fear that someday might end up. You know what? I don't agree with
get it out.
Well, to get it out, like we talked about this. the more drama you create around a document, they will get that document.
Yes.
I guarantee you that
No
they will
doubt.
get that document. 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 18 months from now. The more you drag it on, the more drama you create around what's in that document.
Totally agree.
So again, this is a hard-learned experience. I understand all the reasons why you want to protect your dissent channel, or you want to, and I don't mean to pick on Tony. I'm just trying to make like a general point that I think that
it's a comms point.
They're also a little too nervous about this Afghan oversight. Like what was good about the 12-page document is that the debate that they should want to have is about, do you still think we should have troops in Afghanistan? And Trump is the guy who made the deal with the Taliban, not us, right? The more you create the drama around things like document production, or are you cooperating, or who's testifying, the more the drama is not about the core question of Afghanistan policy, and is about, like, are you hiding something?
The mystery.
So I offer this as advice. I'd offer it privately as well as publicly. Like, the more you just say, we have nothing to hide, yes, now it's physically impossible to produce everything Republicans want, and I'm not suggesting that, but like, just beware the trap of the Washington drama of drip, drip, drip.
I also just think, like, my big picture view is still that every single president who worked on Afghanistan owns part of this failure.
Of course.
Like, I could make it argued for every one of them owning it the most. Bush for invading Iraq and taking his eye off the ball. Obama for listening to the military and doing a counterinsurgency strategy and sending more troops. Trump for cutting this garbage deal. Like, Biden for pulling out too quickly. Like, in some ways, Biden was left like he was playing musical chairs. And was the last guy standing.
No, that's entirely correct.
And you could say, well, he has the most responsibility. He's been around the longest.
No,
he was VP. He was in the Senate.
Yeah.
I don't really agree with that. I think we all own it, and I would just say that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And by the way, I think Americans totally understand that. Like, they totally understand that. That just didn't go well. And I mean,
there's no spin in this one.
There's no spin in this one.
Yeah. Also, Ben, in the better late than never category, Congress might finally repeal the Iraq War authorization.
Yeah.
So it passed the Senate with 68 yes votes, but it's going to require a coalition of basically like Democrats and Freedom Caucus types to get through the House. Have you seen anyone articulate an argument in opposition to repealing the Iraq War authorization? What possible argument could there be?
We wanted to repeal this like back in the Obama years, and I like the people. If you pressed on who actually like wanted to keep it, it's like scary reasons like, maybe we could use it to attack like Iran or something. I don't know.
Course.
Like they're weird bank shot arguments, or like,
God damn it.
Because actually, like the case we were making back then is like, even when we had a counter ISIS presence in Iraq, that was actually under the original AUMF. The counter Al Qaeda.
Right.
My opinion is they should all be repealed and replaced by new ones. Like if we have a reason to go to war against a terrorist organization, get a new one. But I think as meaningless as this feels to people, the reason it is important is it's important to set the precedent that these things end, because the real one that you want to repeal is the post 9/11 one that has been used everywhere. And again, often on the Obama administration as well as others. It's important to say like, hey, look, we can actually end one of these things that we started.
Definitely. And also shout out Tim Kaine for fighting for this.
I really admire
Tim Kaine of Virginia.
He's been on this war power thing forever, and he deserves a lot of credit.
It's a lonely fight.
Yeah.
Lonely fight.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about President Macron in Beijing. Pod Save the World is brought to you by the International Rescue Committee. The International Rescue Committee, founded at the call of Albert Einstein, I didn't know that, responds to humanitarian crises worldwide, helping refugees and displaced families survive, recover, and rebuild their lives. The IRC operates in more than 40 countries, delivering lasting impact by providing healthcare, helping children learn, and empowering individuals and communities to become self-reliant. In 2021, the IRC and partners reached over 31.5 million people in countries affected by crisis. The IRC uses rigorous research methods to anticipate humanitarian emergency needs so that they can respond more quickly and effectively when disaster hits. Charitable donations help the IRC provide families with emergency supplies and the resources they need to recover and rebuild their lives. Please consider making a monthly donation to the IRC. Your gift will provide steady, reliable support the IRC can count on. You can adjust or cancel your monthly gift at any time. Donate today by visiting help.rescue.org/donate. That's help.rescue.org/donate. Give to the IRC. It's a great organization. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Harry's. You know when you log into one of those delivery apps, I won't name one, and you look at all the various options, all the mediocrity that you've ordered before, and you don't know what to do. In a sea of options, it can be hard to find the gem. You know what I mean? It can be hard to find that high-quality razor that you depend on, that perfect meal. But Harry's makes it easy. They consistently give you better razors than in-store options at the best price. Harry's razors are refilled when you need them and delivered straight to your door so you can choose Harry's once and they will take care of the rest. Get a quality shave without the hassle with a $3 Harry's trial set. The starter set is $13 value for just $3 at harrys.com/savetheworld. It includes a 5-blade German-engineered razor, weighted handle, foaming shave gel, and a travel cover. Plus, you can schedule replacement blade delivery whenever you need them with refills as low as $2. Harry's makes more great self-care products than ever before. Shaving creams for before and after you shave, body washes, hydrating lotions, and more. Look, I love my Harry's razor. I got them recently. And look, one of the problems I always have is you just forget to buy razor blades because they cost $1 billion. So you end up shaving over and over with a dull blade that tears your face apart. Then your wife ultimately steals it, and then you're left with nothing. Don't be that guy. Get Harry's. Save the hassle. Set up your delivery. Get the best quality shave with Harry's. Get a $13 starter set for just $3 at harrys.com/savetheworld. That's harrys.com/savetheworld for a $3 starter set. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Ramp. Want a better way to simplify your business finances across expenses, vendor payments, and accounting?
I've been asking for it.
If so, Ramp could be a game changer. Ramp is the corporate card and expense management software designed to help you save time and put money back in your pocket. Ramp gives finance teams unprecedented control and insight into company spend. With Ramp, you're able to issue cards to every employee with limits and restrictions and automate expense reporting so you can stop wasting time at the end of every month. Ramp's accounting software automatically collects receipts and categorizes your expenses in real time so you don't have to. You'll never have to chase down a receipt again, and your employees will no longer spend hours submitting expense reports. The time you'll save each month on employee expenses will allow you to close your books 8 times faster. Ramp saves you money. Businesses that use Ramp save an average of 3.5% the first year. That's a lot. Ramp is easy to use. Get started, issue virtual and physical cards, and start making payments in less than 15 minutes, whether you have 5 employees or 5,000. And now you get $250 when you join Ramp. Just go to ramp.com/world. That's ramp.com/world, ramp.com/world. All right, Ben. So French President Emmanuel Macron took a 3-day trip to China, and people are super pissed about it. Macron and Xi Jinping, they had a private dinner. They got out of Beijing. They went to a province. Macron hung out with some students. Before the trip, Macron said he was going to push Xi to do more to end the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but their 6-hour hangout
didn't really feel like that.
didn't move the ball, did it? No. The communique didn't really move the ball
tea
either.
Ceremonies. And,
they liked the tea.
Kind of a bromance.
They had a bromance vibe. Macron basically, I think he got a vague assurance that Xi would call President Zelensky at some point, TBD. They didn't seem to publicly discuss Taiwan, and right after Macron left, the Chinese military started a series of military exercises where I think they basically encircled Taiwan.
Yeah.
This was their very petulant response to the president of Taiwan, President Tsai's meetings with Kevin McCarthy in Latin America. So it seems like Xi's strategy is to sort of peel France off from more hardline European countries who are more critical of China. I can't tell if it's working. Macron was accompanied by Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission president, who got a lot less love.
She's much more hardline.
Yeah.
She's much more focused on human rights and she.
Did she get tea?
She did not get tea, or she didn't get the good stuff. Put it that way. Yeah, not the top shelf tea.
So I was going to read you one quote, and then I want to sort of get your gut on whether these people should be so pissed about this. So Macron said, he did an interview with Politico where he said the following. The paradox would be that, overcome with panic, we believe we are just America's followers. This is about Taiwan. The question Europeans need to answer is it in our interest to accelerate a crisis on Taiwan? No. The worst thing would be to think that we Europeans must become followers on this topic and take our cue from the U.S. agenda and the Chinese overreaction. So, okay, I get at face value why people one, don't have a lot of faith in Macron's diplomacy, right? Because he ran around with Putin before the Russian invasion. He thought he like solved
Remember
it.
the picture of him in the hooded sweatshirt, like, racked with pain?
Yes. And then one of the long table.
Yeah.
And I think he told reporters on one of his flights home from Russia that he'd like solved it, and then Putin just invaded the next day, right? So skepticism is fair. On the other hand, we just did a big episode on the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, where the French were right and we were wrong.
Yeah.
Not long ago, we had Trump threatening fire and fury in North Korea. It's not hard to see why the Europeans or the French might want a little space from U.S. foreign policy at times, in particular, a war with China. Where do you land on the D.C. outrage?
I don't. Yeah, I'm kind of like in the middle, with an understanding of Macron's position, which is what I take from this visit is, look, if you're in Europe, you don't know whether Trump's coming back. Like, that's number one. So you want to hedge on the U.S. generally,
reality.
because you just don't know. There could be a crazy person running this country in a couple of years. Secondly, like the China issue is nowhere near as advanced in terms of like viewing China as like this boogeyman in Europe as it is in the U.S. Like deep commercial relationships, deep economic relationships. Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany went over there with like 100 CEOs before Macron did. So it's also a hedge against like what we call decoupling. This idea that the kind of West, not just the U.S., but all of our supply chains in certain areas are going to have to somehow untangle themselves from China. Incredibly complex thing. And the Europeans are like, do we really want to like disadvantage our companies and all this stuff because the Americans have decided that they're getting super hawkish on China.
As we pass these like very nationalist climate change tax provisions and the CHIPS Act.
Yeah. As we pursue basically this like mercantilist policy here that screws European companies.
Exactly.
So like I don't do I like the image of Emmanuel Macron kind of soft pedaling Taiwan and soft pedaling human rights and kind of giving Xi Jinping a PR win? No. And I think Macron did kind of walk right into the protocol trap that the Chinese set, which is we make you look like you're literally visiting an emperor.
Yeah,
like Xi is the emperor, and here's we're going to allow you to drink tea in this place, and they appear like they lost control of that optic, and he should have taken some more opportunities to pointedly criticize the war in Ukraine or to raise issues around human rights
the Uyghurs.
or the Uyghurs.
Yeah.
Like that's where I fault Macron is on just kind of rolling over generally. But I do think it's a useful warning to Washington to not assume that the Europeans are going to like march in lockstep behind our China policy without us kind of meeting them, in the middle or at least having an effort to kind of come together and figure out a joint policy, or like have we really brought them into our thinking on Taiwan? I think the warning signal is they still have doubts about U.S. credibility because they don't know if Trump's coming back. And even with Biden, I think they feel like they haven't been brought along as a part of this China policy.
I mean, if you're sitting in Paris, like you're looking at U.S.-China relations and you're seeing a debate over why didn't they kill the balloon faster? Like,
and we look like a bunch of fucking morons with the balloon. And never mind the fact, by the way, that like the signature part of our China policy was an AUKUS deal that cost the French like $80 billion in subs or something.
Yeah, we screwed them out of a huge submarine
And then
contract.
we get pissed that he goes to China. I mean, like, so again, like I'm not like a Macron apologist because I think he overcranks everything.
It can be annoying.
He overcranked the bromance with Xi.
Yep.
And at a sensitive time right after Xi had been in Moscow. So there's all kinds of things to criticize Macron for. But the fact of him going and having that's normal. And I also think, frankly, the United States needs to be talking to China too. Yeah. There's a place for diplomacy and engagement, even as we're taking all this confrontational tone.
Yeah.
And stuff.
I bet we have a lot of listeners in France. Tweeted us like, what's the coverage been like? How's this playing over in Paris?
I was there during the China visit. Yeah.
How'd it look? Could you read it?
I could read some of it with my study abroad French. Part of what was the story there is that like after Macron like lights his fuse and blows up like French politics with his ramming through his pension.
Yeah.
It was like he's trying to rehabilitate himself by playing statesman.
Interesting.
He's left this like fucking mess to all of his deputies. So there was more like it wasn't questioning the assumption of why is he going to China. It was like, what the hell? They come back and mind the story.
Hey, bro, where are you going?
Yeah,
that makes sense. Okay, well,
But I'd be curious what actual French people think. That was just my
no, it's
my South of France Chateauneuf de Pop correspondent take.
Send us a copy of the latest Charlie Hebdo and whatever else you're reading. So, okay, well, speaking of statesmen on the global stage, Ben, President Biden is on a 4-day trip to Ireland and the UK. He started in Belfast in Northern Ireland to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement, which ended 30 years of fighting between Protestants and Catholics, and those who wanted Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK and those who wanted Ireland to be one big sovereign state together. This fighting feels so far away to me at this point in time, but it was wild to read that there was an intelligence report about an IRA bomb threat to coincide with Biden's visit. So like tensions are like just under the surface. As we've discussed before, part of the reason these tensions are under the surface or just under the surface is because Brexit nearly upended the Good Friday Agreement many years later. There was, when the UK left the European Union, Northern Ireland came out with it, and no one wanted to see a land border or a big customs check put up between Ireland and Northern Ireland. So Biden goes to the Republic of Ireland later in the week. He's got meetings with the president there, the Taoiseach, and he'll address a joint session of the Irish legislature. This visit is very personal for Biden. He's Irish Catholic. I think he's the first Irish Catholic president since Kennedy to visit, or maybe first since Kennedy, period. Yeah. He's going to meet with relatives while he's there and visit a cathedral that Biden's great-great-great-grandfather helped construct. He sold them the bricks, apparently.
And probably more legit than the Obama relative that we found.
Those are some good stories, though.
Yeah.
That was some good shit.
Yeah.
Ben, are you taking the over or the under on 20 Seamus Haney quotes during the trip?
Oh my God. Biden? Yeah. Definitely the over. And look, I everybody loves Ireland in American politics.
For sure.
And so I think we should allow Joe Biden this moment of just soaking in the adulation, the friendship, the friendliness, of being in Ireland. The Belfast, this is really important. Like I remember we went there and, like you could sense like it's like right underneath the surface there, like there's an agreement on paper, but there's still a lot of mistrust.
So there's still a wall between these communities.
Yeah, there's still
literally
peace walls, literally, and the peace walls are actually not peace walls. They're to keep communities separated.
Right.
So reinforcing that importance of that agreement, I think, is badly needed. It's a useful timing too, given all the recent tension around it. But with this kind of Windsor agreement that Rishi Sunak has, like there's at least a plausible pathway forward. So I think kind of reinvesting in that is important as a diplomatic achievement, but as unfinished business. But yeah, I mean, let's face it, this is going to be like a lot of Joe Biden anecdotes and quotes and, my uncle this or my dad this, and
it's going to be incredible with like every Irish American politician.
Oh, can you imagine the manifest? Can you imagine the number of members of Congress that we're trying to get on this?
I was talking to someone on the NSC staff who had gotten bumped off of Air Force One and bumped off of the support plane and put on a commercial flight because there was just like such a massive entourage.
Yeah, and that doesn't happen very often. Ireland is like basically a domestic campaign stop. Let's be very honest.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Here's another story we're keeping an eye on. So it is currently the Muslim holy month of Ramadan. During that month, there is a tradition of sorts where Muslim worshipers will stay overnight in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is this very sacred spiritual site for Muslims, as well as a symbol of resistance for Palestinians. The Israeli government does not approve of or often allow people to stay overnight at the mosque, so they often evict worshipers at times by force. That brings us to last week, where there were some incredibly disturbing videos of Israeli security forces beating the shit out of Palestinian worshipers and firing stun grenades inside the mosque. Hundreds of people were arrested, dozens were hurt. These videos spread like wildfire to the entire Muslim world. Militant groups, most likely Hamas, but we don't know that, responded with rocket fire from Gaza and South Lebanon. Israel responded with airstrikes in Gaza. And just to make things more complicated, Ramadan, Passover, and Easter all overlap this year. So everyone's trying to visit the Temple Mount holy sites at the same time. In the past, one of Bibi's far-right ministers, Itamar Ben-Gvir, who we've talked about a few times, has called for Jews to ascend the Temple Mount. There is some far-right Jewish activist every year who tries to sacrifice a fucking goat on the Temple Mount.
Just to piss people off.
Apparently that's very inflammatory. I don't totally understand why. I think it's because only Muslims can worship at the Temple Mount, and this is like OG worshiping, like biblical worshiping. If you kill a goat. If there's any goats listening, let us know. Also, shout out to you guys for surviving. So last week it felt like this could spiral out of control into a massive war in Gaza, like we saw, 2 years ago?
Or South Lebanon. That's where there hasn't been a war since 2006.
That's a good point. Yeah. So the Israeli government has halted visits to the Temple Mount by Jewish worshipers and tourists for now to prevent more tensions. Ramadan ends April 20th. So I guess we're kind of holding our breath until then, but I don't know if there's anything else you're watching here.
What I'm watching is, because what was interesting about the South Lebanon piece of this is it seemed like Hamas and Hezbollah, which are distinct, obviously, organizations, it seems like some degree of teaming up
coordination
in this case, which is, a big development in a way. I mean, Hezbollah is a much stronger organization.
Yeah, keep me off that group chat.
Tons of rockets in southern Lebanon, basically controls southern Lebanon. And then you got Hamas in Gaza. That's a two-front war for Israel, right? That's a different thing than just a Gaza war. So one is that, watch whether Hezbollah and Hamas are going to be more collaborative. But then also just, the introduction of Lebanon was a new angle here, but also just the longer this Israeli government is around, it's a reminder that this could get out of control.
At any time.
Like the wrong thing could happen at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. They're Jewish extremists who wanted to blow it up. I mean, this is how far it could get. This thing could catch fire. Every day that people like Ben-Gvir are in that government running national security agencies, the capacity for an incident to get out of hand that starts a real war, at least on the scale of the Gaza wars we've seen, but perhaps bigger, is there.
Yeah, it's really nerve-wracking. I asked my friend Yair Rosenberg, who writes for The Atlantic, great writer. These are the kinds of things I DM him. Okay, dumb question. Why is sacrificing a goat on the Temple Mount such a big deal? He wrote me back about 800 words, so I'll read it and get back to you guys for the next pod. Another thing, Ben. So last year, I did this mini-series with Roger Bennett from Men in Blazers. It's a little podcast called World Corrupt. It's about the World Cup soccer tournament in Qatar and this trend of sports washing when corrupt autocrats like our friend Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, or companies like Gazprom, the Russian state oil and gas conglomerate, invest in or sponsor teams to burnish their image. The series was ostensibly about Qatar and those games. By the end of it, I was basically concerned that Saudi Arabia is the real sports washing elephant in the room and about to become the biggest player here. They already purchased an English Premier League team, the Newcastle Bonesaws. MBS was jealous of the shine Qatar got from hosting. So the Saudis also hired Lionel Messi, who's the GOAT, the greatest player of all time, to be their tourism ambassador. Yeah. Now there are reports that Messi has been offered more than $400 million per year to play in the Saudi Soccer League. This comes as the Saudis are going to compete. I'm doing that in air quotes for those listening. Because competition implies fairness and not bribing people, and that's not what I expect will happen here. They're going to compete for the 2030 World Cup. Cristiano Ronaldo, another star player who is a little past his prime, signed up to play in the Saudi League last year, so it's this growing entity. But I don't know, man. The stars feel pretty aligned for 2030 World Cup in fucking Riyadh.
Well, because they'll spend. I mean, the Messi salary is indicative of that they'll spend any amount of money. I mean,
any amount.
They would have given Tiger $1 billion to. He just didn't need it. And it'll be
to
interesting.
Play on the Live Golf Tour.
And the thing is, even without that, I mean, what's interesting is Messi's currently on Paris Saint-Germain, PSG. Qatar basically owns that team,
through
right? And then the uniform is Qatar Airways. So what's interesting is that the Gulf, soccer is clearly a status thing for these guys, and there's this kind of takeover happening of soccer by Gulf countries, and if you have bottomless money, you can do that. I mean, even the Messi tourism deal. It's literally he goes down there and takes a few Instagram pictures and they give him tens of millions of dollars.
That's it. And it's not officially for the World Cup, but obviously, you're promoting Saudi tourism in soccer. So the subtext is the 2030 games, and Argentina, where Messi is from, is part of a competing bid.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess to be fair, it used to be the U.S. that had David Beckham at the end of his career, here in LA. But like the difference here obviously is like the reason that Mohammed bin Salman is seeking these kinds of ornaments is to kind of change what we think about when we think about him because of what he's done, not just with Khashoggi, but in a lot of ways. And you just have to keep reminding yourself each time like that's where this money comes from.
Yeah. There's an MLS team that I think has offered Messi an ownership stake.
Miami team,
in
right?
the franchise. Yeah, the Miami team, but I don't think they can compete with Saudi money. I mean, who can?
I mean, the only thing there is that Miami's like the capital of Latin America in a lot of ways, so he's got this platform down back to,
Would you rather live in Miami or Riyadh, bud? Come on. Jeddah.
Actually, I mean, that's he doesn't want to. It's just
He's got more money than anyone. God, he probably pays no taxes in Saudi.
When is
anyway.
enough? Well, that's true. Yeah.
Okay, last thing before we get to Ben's interview. So we have all spent the last few months watching Elon to the ground. He spent $44 billion. And then recently valued his own company at $20 billion. So tough. There was that one hilarious week, Ben, when Twitter Blue was rolled out, and you could impersonate, brands or anybody you wanted for $8. That was fun. Since then, it's been mostly just whining from people on Twitter with blue check marks about losing their blue verification check marks, even as they pretend they don't care about the check marks and say they're going to quit the site and then come back the next day like nothing ever happened. But every once in a while, Elon and his little minions do something capricious and stupid and genuinely damaging, like last week when Twitter decided to label NPR as state-affiliated media, giving it the same label as state-run propaganda channels like RT in Russia. That happened even though their own definition of state-affiliated media said that organizations with editorial independence like the BBC or NPR are not defined as state media. So Elon is like, he didn't seem to know his own policy. He didn't seem to know that NPR gets less than 1% of its funding from the U.S. government, or that the BBC gets its funding from British citizens who are charged a license
He's
fee.
clearly never been subjected to a week-long pitch drive on Morning Edition.
We could have solved this for you with one tote bag.
Yeah, exactly.
Come on.
Yeah.
What are you doing? That's a really good point. So, it's just so frustrating to watch these idiots who have not thought for 1 minute about these hard issues, kind of learn the facts in real time, and then in the process just destroy what was once a pretty helpful way to get news.
It's always interesting that these guys like Elon Musk and the general vibe of the crypto tech bro, drive-by geopolitical experts, walk constantly right into what about Putin, what aboutism, kind of positions. Like NPR, we can have the same label as Pravda or as RT, they just always trends in that direction,
Yeah, why is that? I mean, is it just a right-wing thing?
It's just the breadcrumbs are just laid in that direction, so they just follow them, but it does show, but just from a business standpoint too, why are you down in those weeds of how you're labeling NPR? It just shows the kind of enormous, colossal pettiness of this whole enterprise.
Yeah, because you wanted to show the gang at TP USA that you owned the libs.
Yeah, you really wanted to dunk on Terry Gross or something. What the fuck is going on? I love NPR.
I love Terry
Gross. Back the fuck off NPR. Okay,
yeah.
And by the way, I was in the U.S. government. They state media shit. I never.
They kicked their ass up and down.
They kicked the shit out of us because they were actually smart.
Polite hushed tones.
They actually knew what the fuck they were talking about. And they'd lull you in with their hushed tones, and then they'd drop the hammer on you. Or Ari Shapiro would have that really friendly thing, but then by the third question, fuck, he just walked me right into the end of a labyrinth.
Yeah, this super tall, handsome man with a lyrical voice destroyed me. You just go watch the Sweaty Balls SNL tape and just calm down, Elon.
Just chill out.
Just chill out. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, you'll hear Ben's interview with Valerie Hopkins from the New York Times about reporting in Russia. So stick around for that. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Simply Safe. Who's planning to do some spring cleaning this year?
No, thank you.
Not me. Dust those hard-to-reach places. Clean out that closet. You know the one. Here's my advice. Clean your house and then protect every inch of it with Simply Safe Home Security. We recommend it.
Or else you won't have a house to clean.
That's a very good point, John. Or else these robbers will clean you out. Love It has had a Simply Safe for many years. He set it up himself. He says the sensors and other technology is top-notch. We know this because we tried to break in recently. And we're repelled by a series of moats.
Spend a night in the clinker.
Alarms. Yeah, John did some time. But that's because Simply Safe It catches all intruders. It's designed with cutting-edge technology and backed by 24/7 professional monitoring. In an emergency, agents use Fast Protect technology, only from SimpliSafe, to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police dispatch. 24/7 professional monitoring service costs under $1 a day, less than half the price of traditional home security systems. You can lock and unlock your doors, access your cameras, and arm and disarm your system from anywhere. CNET named SimpliSafe their editor's choice for 2023. Customize the perfect system for your home in just a few minutes at simplysafe.com/crookedworld. Go today and claim a free indoor security camera plus 20% off your order with interactive monitoring. That's simplysafe.com/crookedworld. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Pod Save the World is brought to you by Real Paper. It's April, and that means Earth Month is here.
It's a whole month now.
This is the time to consider the products that you buy and the impact that they make on our planet. So if you're still using conventional toilet paper in your home, there's no better time to dump the stuff that contributes to deforestation and switch to Real's 100% bamboo toilet paper. When you use Real, you're not sacrificing anything. You're not harming yourself to help the earth. It feels like an upgrade. It's always shipped free to your door in plastic-free packaging, and you can schedule it on a subscription so that Real paper comes exactly when you need it, and you never have to worry about forgetting to buy it at the store. Real is now partnered with One Tree Planted. With every box of Real that you buy, they are funding reforestation efforts across the country. So unlike other TP that cuts down trees, Real is helping to actively plant them. Please add your own personalization endorsement. John Lovett would be here, but he's currently testing out the product, if you know what I'm saying. Maybe we could try to patch him in.
It's been like that for 30 minutes.
Yeah. I mean, he seems happy as a clam in there. Maybe we can get him on line. I'm getting some notes from the big board that we probably shouldn't do that. Here's all you need to know. Real paper, it's fantastic. It does the job, but also it just shows up at your house. It's easy, hassle-free subscriptions for one-time purchases on their website. All orders are conveniently delivered to your home with free shipping and 100% recyclable, plastic-free packaging. If you go to realpaper.com/world, you sign up for a subscription using my code WORLD at checkout, you automatically get 30% off your first order and free shipping. That's REELPAPER.com/world. Enter the promo code WORLD to get 30% off your first order plus free shipping. Let's make a change for good this year and switch to Real Paper. Real is paper for the planet. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist who can take you on that journey of self-discovery from wherever you are. What's one thing you tell your 20-year-old self that you wish you'd known about yourself then, and why? Bet on the 2004 Red Sox to win it all.
There you go.
Hey, that Tom Brady guy, you want to latch on to him. Or you can get therapy a little earlier, work through some things, avoid some problems. That's another tip you'd give to your 20-year-old self. If you are thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Look, we joke around a lot on this show, but if you're out there in the world, in this annoying world, not having a little therapy, not having someone to talk to from time to time, you're doing it wrong.
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself.
Treat yourself to a less busy, less anxious mind.
Mm-hmm.
Discover your potential with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/crookedworld. Go today for 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/crookedworld.
We are very pleased to welcome to Pod Save the World Valerie Hopkins, who is an international correspondent for the New York Times, who's covered Russia and Ukraine extraordinarily well, bringing stories of how Russians are thinking, how they're experiencing the war, among other things. So, Valerie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me on.
One question I think that is on a lot of people's mind, and we'll get to the arrest of Evan Gershkovich in a moment here, but just in terms of being a reporter in Russia since the war started, how has your reporting had to change? Like, what risks are you aware of, both to either yourself or your sources, that has led you to make adjustments over the course of the last year?
That's a great question, but I wouldn't say that my reporting's been adjusted in the past year. I think that Moscow 2021 wasn't exactly an easy place to report. It obviously became much more difficult after Russia invaded Ukraine. It became much more complicated, and certainly many people didn't feel safe at that time and left. I was in Ukraine reporting about Ukraine, so I didn't have to make that decision about leaving. But when everybody came back, when people did come back, it was in a much smaller group. I think I can count on one hand the number of American reporters we had in Moscow. And I would say it was just more of a constant awareness that we are under surveillance, which we already were before,
Yeah.
that we are being watched and followed, especially when we travel outside, that we are being sort of harassed by local media outlets if we travel outside of Moscow as well, and in the course of our normal reporting. Some every outlet made different decisions in terms of how to respond to the very strict censorship laws that were passed less than a week after the war started. Things like not being allowed to use the word war, not being allowed to disseminate any information that wasn't, part of the official Ministry of Defense's information. When I was deciding whether or not I would go back, the discussion I had with my editors was that I don't want to make any compromises about that. I don't want to not call a war, and I don't want to, I don't want my reporting to be hindered in any way. And I would say probably Evan had the same discussions with his editors.
It's interesting you mentioned the handful of American reporters there, and did you guys talk to each other about this? I mean, you talk about talking to your editors, but were you, as a Times person, talking to Evan, the Journal person, talking to the people who were there for other Western outlets?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it is funny that, the Times and the Journal are competitors. But, first of all, Evan was in Moscow far longer than I was, and he was always providing me with advice, encouraging me to pursue whatever line of storyline I was pursuing, and also it's most importantly, with Evan and with other journalists, we sort of shared our experiences, strange things that happened to us in the field, perceptions about what was going on, and mostly sort of, were frequently commenting on what was happening around us, right? So, we had a conversation over dinner one night in February, I think, after two people who gave a video interview like Vox Pop to Deutsche Welle were charged with something that's called discrediting the armed forces of the Russian Federation. So that's, saying something about the war that's not flattering to the war. And those people were tracked down, I guess, using facial recognition because they didn't give their names, and they were charged. So we would very frequently have discussions about how do we continue to do journalism in such an environment. Then I think a month after that, there was a man on the Moscow metro who was just reading his phone, and he was taken in by the police because his neighbor denounced him for having something sort of pro-Ukrainian on his phone. I don't know exactly what it was. So, it was a very tense environment, and only by sharing this information kind of were we able to talk to figure out how we would go about our work. But, for Evan and also for me and for others, what we cared about most and what we focused on most was how to make sure that none of our reporting harmed the people that chose to talk to us, whether those were people in the street or whether those were sources. There was always this feeling that the real danger is to them rather than to us journalists with, accreditation from the foreign ministry.
And this will begin to get into Evan's story, but I mean, you mentioned that the harassment picks up when you leave Moscow. Whereas, Moscow, I think they like to keep this appearance that it's this cosmopolitan capital. But
I mean, I've also been photographed in broad daylight talking to sources at Moscow restaurants with a person who fits the profile 100% of belonging to the security services, just sitting behind me with their phone, right in my face. So I guess it's intensified a bit.
I'm going to take a quick tangent here to tell you a story, which is that when I was doing the negotiations with the Cubans, when I was in government, I was meeting the Cubans in a hotel in Canada once, and I went to check in, and this very conspicuous couple, tattoos, like just really stood out, walked up to me, stood about 3 feet from me, very close, took out an iPhone and just started taking pictures of me. And I'm certain it was the Russians. It's a weird tactic that they have. Like, we want you to know we're watching. But I guess what I was getting at is, like, what do you think they don't want the world to know? Like, it seems like if there's sensitivity to going outside of Moscow, and with Evan, it was, maybe reporting on the Wagner Group, but it might also be reporting on just public sentiments out in the provinces. Like, what is your sense of, what is this about? Is this that they don't want the world to know certain things that are only available to reporters who can get out and talk to people?
I mean, believe me, this is, this is a constant source of conversation in the last 13 days among our friend group, among other correspondents, among other people who follow Russia. I think in part it's a systemic extension of this kind of need to completely control the message, right? I mean, at a time when the state is doing things like relieving a single dad of custody over his 12-year-old daughter because of things he wrote on social media, or because of a picture she drew in school, or accusing, a 19-year-old college student of supporting terrorism for an Instagram post. Evan was still trying to do incredibly ambitious and incredibly difficult reporting. I think that is pretty annoying to the security services.
Yeah.
I hesitate to speculate on what they're really thinking, right? There are many people who think that they are looking for people to use in a potential exchange for the many Russian spies that have been getting arrested in the recent weeks and months. But again, I don't want to speculate on that, but I think it's just, for me, it's incredibly heartbreaking because there was already so few American journalists in Russia. Of course, it's a very difficult assignment, to be a reporter from what Russia calls an unfriendly country, from a country that, the foreign ministry says they're de facto fighting a war against. But at the same time, America, with its role in the world, and Russia, the biggest country in the world, like, need to find some understanding. And I think that, having people on the ground providing a nuanced picture of the country contributes a lot to that. And it's very, very upsetting to think about. Just, it's already become so much harder after 1 year of the war to figure out what's going on in Russia and to report about the war. And I don't want to even think about what will happen, the longer this goes on, but I mean, I think Evan is an incredibly resourceful, incredibly talented, fluent in Russian, and creative journalist. And I think that that's not something that the Kremlin appreciates, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk about Evan for a moment here. I mean, what you guys are colleagues in a way, even if you work for competitive papers, and you clearly know him well. And what's it like to see him? You've covered people arrested, and you see the footage of them being taken into custody, and you see the kind of Potemkin legal proceedings begin. What's it like to watch that and see someone like Evan? Like, what do you, when you see those images of him, what do you think is going through his head? Like he must have obviously known the risks. Like, what do you see when you see your friend?
I still have a hard time articulating it, with some other friends who were also close to Evan. A few days ago, we were talking about the way that we were, zooming in. There's not very much footage. There's basically one photo of him in his coat, which I've just seen him wearing, days before his arrest. It's incredibly hard to watch, and it's incredibly scary, and it's infuriating. And I think, you know, mm, the only thing I can think of is that I hope he can get home very soon. And knowing him as I do, I pretty much think he, um, what can I say? I think he's just frustrated that he can't be covering Russia right now, and
Yeah.
instead he's stuck.
Yeah.
Aside from the whole ordeal, but I think it is, I've gone to a lot of trials in the past year, for people who have been accused of pretty trumped up charges. And this is the first time for me that I've been personally affected. And you just see how it completely destroys, like, an entire circle of people, everybody who's Evan's family, his friends, all the people that care about him, like hundreds and not thousands of people, who studied with him, who can't really do very much besides think about how to get him free. And I do wonder about, how that just is being replicated on a very large scale at this point in Russia, with the political prisoners, also with people who were not, actively engaging in politics, but simply, thought that they could still share a joke on the internet.
Yeah. Well, you said, understandably, you're not going to speculate about motivation. I mean, but clearly the Kremlin does things for a reason, or multiple reasons, and they charged him with very serious charges, right? This is not like a Brittany Griner circumstance. This is equating him with a spy.
Yes, although they changed the laws, just before the war started, to really broaden the definition of espionage, right? So it's incredibly broad at this point. It's sort of even if you don't pass information, for instance, to another, to any government or any other party, having any knowledge of, like, essentially the military industrial complex, or any knowledge of the military, or it's so incredibly broad that so much can fall under it. I just don't want to overstate. I wish I could be a bit more specific, but I just don't want to overstate that it's, I mean, they have in their statement, of course, they said that he was doing this on the orders of the U.S., but the way that they have rewritten the law was, precisely to be able to apply it to any number of actually quite petty offenses.
Yeah.
Or things that, sorry, I shouldn't even say petty offenses, because it's actually just
anything
the
that they
normal type
determine.
of job
Yeah.
my colleagues, would do anywhere in the world.
No, it's not unlike, the national security law in Hong Kong, right? Which is like, nobody quite knows what it is. Like, talking to a foreigner could get you thrown in prison. But the question I had is, like, they may obviously try to leverage this for exchanges, spies, like you said, but also, like, they have to know that Western media outlets are now, everybody's going to be thinking about, like, whether or not it's safe to report there. Do you think it's safe for people to report there? And do you think that part of what, again, you don't have to answer it, but, like, they're part of their motivation may be that they don't want anyone reporting there?
Well, I think this has certainly had a chilling effect, right? Every single journalist sitting in Moscow has been talking to each other, talking to their editors, trying to determine the risks, and also trying to find, some reason why they maybe are safe, right? Different European people from different European countries think, oh, well, like, our country doesn't do exchange, so I'm not a target, or maybe I just won't look into these certain things. But I think that what we've seen over the past 14 months and more is that we're dealing with an incredibly unpredictable apparatus.
Yeah.
So, I remember before I went back, I felt that Russia was more dangerous than Ukraine. If I don't want to offend anyone, but, like, and if you are going to cover the front line in Ukraine, you prepare for it. You have a security team, you have, protective gear, you hopefully have someone with you who knows how to do, proper first aid, and you're primed for it. And in Russia, and then you limit your exposure. And in Russia, it's just very unpredictable. Evan was able to do incredible reporting since he came back in July without any hindrance. And now all of a sudden, he's being taken away from a barbecue restaurant with a sweater over his head.
Yeah, and that's what's so scary is you don't know what the thing is, right? That why is something totally normal one day and then the next day you're in prison. And we've seen Russia do this in the past, like demonstration cases to more broadly chill. I wanted to ask you about Russian opinion, which you've covered, because it's such a black box, and the first the kind of elimination of Russian independent media kind of silenced a portion of that. Obviously, the political opposition with Alexei Navalny in prison has been pushed out of the country. We just don't have a good handle on what Russians think of this war. What is your?
I think nobody, they certainly don't want us to.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, no, that's my question. Is like, what do you think is what is the more nuanced version? Between like Russians are kind of mindlessly going along with this because they worship the state or they like Putin. That's clearly not my experience of Russians, but I'm aware that the Russians I know are, basically the liberal opposition. So, what is your sense of what people don't know about Russian opinion about this war?
Well, I think it's really mixed, and my conversations with ordinary Russians that I would encounter were always, have been some of the most enriching and fascinating part of my reporting. And we would discuss with Evan quite a lot and with other friends that, while there was certainly there's several groups of people, right? About 20% of people admit to pollsters that they don't support the war. Which is already saying something. A much smaller percentage of those people are out protesting, bringing flowers to a Ukrainian monument in Moscow, trying to engage in certain acts of civil disobedience. And 20,000 people were detained, since last February for protesting against the war in various ways. So, this is not an insignificant number. And then there are also a group of people who seem to not really know what they think and who have seemed to given the decision making to a power that, they believe is more informed than them. But there is also another trend in society, which is people, especially in this information vacuum, becoming more and more supportive. The more as Russia becomes ever more cut off from the West, and as access to information is kind of more and more tightened, some people, and maybe just because some people are like that, people are feeling the rally around the flag effect. And this applies. I did some reporting recently in the city of Ryazan, where there's an elite paratroopers training school, and I went to the cemetery. I talked to the mother, and she was upset that the invasion wasn't prepared very well. She was upset that her son died, but she didn't question the premise of the invasion. She wasn't angry that it was happening.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask you, though. Like, so, okay, you've got, there are people who oppose the war, just oppose the war. But then there's this question of there might be people that completely accept the premise of the war, completely usually defer to the state on matters. And yet maybe their loved ones are dying, or maybe they're worried about another round of mobilization, or maybe just things are getting worse. I mean, what should we watch for in terms of cracks among opinion that is not, against the war for the reasons we would want them to be against the war, but may just like there may be fatigue or frustration or or the loss of a loved one, like what are there things we should watch for to get, because usually people watch for things like protests, but that's going to be very hard in the kind of police state you describe. Like, what do you look for? What would you counsel people to look for as metrics, that of whether that's happening or not?
Well, for instance, one metric is there's been a 50% spike, I heard yesterday on the Russian news, in interest in VPNs. The state is trying to crack down so much on access to information and to the internet, and people are actually hungry to get VPNs. There's always a concept. We were in our group chat with Evan, and we were like, "What's going on with this VPN? What's going on with that one?" It was like a game of whack-a-mole constantly. And there are people who are hungry for information. There are people who have been brave enough to put videos of themselves complaining about the conditions that their husbands and sons are being treated in at the front. But I think it's going to take a long time. It took a long time for resentment, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, to really bubble up. And part of that is what the Nobel Prize winning Belarusian author Svetlana Alexievich, noted as this need for, if your son is going to die, you need to feel like it mattered. You need to feel like it was important.
Yeah.
And that, in some ways, that's drawing people further, because they've had to make sacrifices, whether it's that, prices have gone up, and they can afford less, or they're not getting as good benefits now from the government, or the health system is struggling. I think people want to feel like it's worth it. And a lot of people, separately, actually blame the West and not Putin for that. Yeah. And, they often show it to me as evidence that the West has always hated Russia and sought to destroy it.
Yeah.
And there are really people who are happy that Putin is defending them against it, and asserting himself.
Yeah.
Against the West, yeah.
Well, look, last question is just like what we've talked a good bit about Evan. I think you've given us a sense of how dogged he is as a reporter. I mean, is there anything else you would want people to know about him as a person as they're watching this story and thinking about him?
He's just really funny. He's cool. He's very, he's an all-American kind of kind, thoughtful. I don't know, like. He has an energy and a warmth and a charisma, that like anybody listening, like he would befriend you. This is the kind of guy that he is, and I hate to think of him now, not being able to be social and have fun. He's the kind of guy, when you come to Moscow and say like, man, I don't know anyone. I'm not even in a group chat for correspondence. He makes you a group chat.
Yeah.
And then proceeds to talk to you. I'm sort of still at a loss for what I could say, other than that he's an incredible friend, and a very brave guy. And the most important thing actually is, that he really loves his job. This job is exactly his dream. And I think that he really wanted, and wants, it's important for him that people care about this story. And it was important. Every story he puts a lot of work into them, in order to make it alive for people, because if this is going to end, and it will end, what happens inside of Russia is going to play a big role in that. And, he took this risk, to keep all of us better informed about it. And I think now we owe it to him to get him out.
Yeah. Well, look, that's a great note to end on. People should definitely follow you, follow your work, and like wherever you end up, we hope you stay safe, and we'll obviously be hoping the same for Evan. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks again to Valerie for joining the show. Ben, I'm supposed to say at the end of each episode, Follow us at Crooked Media on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and subscribe to Pod Save the World on YouTube for access to full videos of this show and exclusive content, like the really awesome video, I don't know if you've seen this yet, from you and Wally Adiyamo talking about sanctions.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Really great.
Yeah, actually, check that out, because Wally breaks shit down, man. And he did some extra sanction explaining. Yeah, people should definitely check that out.
If you ever heard the word sanction and not known what the hell it is and wondered, check out the Pod Save the World YouTube page.
We should give Wally a whole, not that doesn't have better things to do, but you could have a whole podcast on sanctions when he leaves Treasury.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just come break it down.
How old is he?
He's embarrassingly young.
He looks really young.
Yeah. Embarrassingly, because it's embarrassing how
For
much
us.
he's accomplished.
Yeah.
Wally's, he's not, he's kind of in our neighborhood.
Okay.
That way.
All right. Well, listen, I feel stupid now. But let's check it out, Pod Save the World on YouTube, and leave us a review if you feel so inclined.
Yeah, it makes us feel good.
Cool. Thanks for listening.